Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Tim McCarthy, host of 20 Tim Minutes, a podcast that focuses on mental health through humor, insight, and personal stories. Catch my 20-minute episodes every Tuesday, and on Thursdays, listen to me interview a wide variety of guests where we show our support as well as sharing our own personal struggles and stories with mental health. Let's break the stigma by cracking a smile. 20 Tim Minutes can be found on Digitent Podcast, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Have a good one.
What's up, weirdos?
Hey, yo.
Me? Shit. I got me a little something rolled. The lights are low, and we're about to chop it up with Abigail on the Manic, Pixie, Weirdo podcast.
Okay.
A safe space for weirdos of all shapes, sizes, colors, and creeds to relax and speak their piece.
Speak that piece.
So grab your glass of wine and grass the chief as I get off the mic so the main weirdo can speak. Peace.
Peace, God.
What is up, weirdos? You're listening to the Manic, Pixie, Weirdo. I'm Abigail, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about all the different kinds of relationships that we have in our lives. But first, a word from our sponsor. What is up, you guys? I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our sponsor for this episode, Newsly. It's an audio app for iOS and Android where they basically take articles from all over the world and all the trending topics that are on the web at any given moment, and it reads them to you in like a natural voice, like a human being would. It's basically the first time in the history of the internet where the entire web becomes listenable. It's really cool, you guys. They have all different kinds of articles from all different kinds of topics so that you can like stop scrolling and start listening, which I really love. You can follow all the, any topic, all of the topics, whatever topic you want to talk about or listen about, from sports, science, Bitcoin, even the Kardashians, like everybody. They have all the latest articles and it reads them to you. So it's super easy. They also have podcasts, which is why I'm talking to you guys about it, because our podcast, along with podcasts from over 50 other countries, are on the app. So that's really, really cool. You can start listening there as well. You can download and use Newsly for free right now at www.newsly.me, or you can use this link in the description. And when you use the promo code P1X1EP0DCAST, that will give you a free month of premium subscription to Newsly. So go check it out, you guys. And thank you so much to Newsly for sponsoring this episode. And we're back. And this week we're talking about my relationship with fearlessness. So, yeah. I'll just be honest. I have a very complex relationship with fearlessness. I think a lot of that stems from the fact that I have severe anxiety, and I don't consider myself to be like a fearless person. I consider myself to be a very fearful person. I consider myself to have a lot of like fear-based, what I would call like fear-based reactions to a lot of different scenarios. And so I just don't really consider myself to be like a fearless person. I consider myself to be more of a fuck it person, where I will get to a point and I'll just be like, fuck it. And then I'll just like start doing stuff. And so that, I guess, would kind of like be my definition of fearlessness, I guess, is like when I hit that place of just fuck it, like fuck it all. And then I just like do it. And then I just sort of like, start throwing spaghetti at the wall and like seeing what sticks, kind of a thing. But I just don't consider, so it's just like, this was a difficult subject for me because I just don't consider myself to be a fearless person. And I was trying really hard to come up with a definition of fearlessness. And it sort of led me to like, well, what's the difference between like fearlessness and bravery? And I think that they are kind of like synonyms for each other. I think that they play off of each other. Like, I don't necessarily think that you can be brave without having an element of fearlessness to it. But then that also brought me to like, well, what's the difference between like bravery and stupidity? And I to a certain degree, I feel like they're the same thing. It just depends on like what side you're on, kind of a thing. Um, so like you could do something that like some people would consider to be incredibly brave, and other people would just be like, that's incredibly stupid. And I think that the outcome kind of determines whether or not it was brave or stupid. So like if you do something and like it works, then it's considered brave. But if you do something and it doesn't work, then it's like, well, you're an idiot. And I think fearlessness plays into both, because I think that, which is why I couldn't really, or I was having trouble sort of like detaching from what fearlessness was just like inherently by itself, and like those two other concepts of bravery and stupidity. I think and I sort of came to the conclusion that I'm gonna definitely need to like do a podcast about it at some point in the future, because it just like led me down I went down a very like deep rabbit hole. And so yeah, that's gonna have to be like a future episode for me. Or it's something that I'm gonna have to think about doing in the future, because I just noticed it was like really hard for me to detach from the differences. Um and even to a certain extent like the similarities. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Fearlessness. So, I do think that I think that there are different types of fearlessness. And this is where it goes back into like, you can be fearless like in a stupid way, or you can be fearless in like a brave way. And I was just having a lot of so okay, let's just take those two ideas, that like you can be fearless in a brave way and you can be fearless in a stupid way. Okay, so we have these two elements of this word fearless. And again, I think it's all relative. Like everything on planet Earth is, I think it's all relative. To the individual, to the circumstances of the time, to, I mean, just like you know, name a thing and it's relative. But where I began to really struggle with like defining what fearlessness is for me was because I am such a fearful person, I I really it was really hard for me to come to a place where I could recognize things. See, and that's the other thing for me too, is that like because I don't consider myself to be a fearless person, it was hard for me not only to define it, but for me to like find places in my own life where I would consider something that I did to be fearless. Um, and fearless in like a positive way. Um, because I've been fearless for sure. I've been fearless in like negative aspects of my life. 100% I've been fearless. And those I noticed sort of came, like those times in which I was fearless in like a negative or like stupid way, uh, really, really had a lot to do with, I think, the state of like my mental health at the time. Um, and by that I just mean like I was 9 times out of 10, if I'm being fearless, like something that I would consider myself to be fearless, like if I was doing something that I would consider to be fearless, excuse me, um, then I was in the middle of like a manic episode where I was doing a lot of really what would be perceived as fearless things, but they were more, not necessarily always harmful, but they could be. They had the potential to be harmful. It just didn't, it didn't always work out that way. But like, so like an example would be of something fearless that I did while in the middle of a manic episode, uh, would be something like drive across country just to get a tattoo and then turn around and go home, or drive across country to meet a girl, um, just to get a tattoo to meet a girl and then to come home, and like those kinds of things. Um, Living with someone that you barely know. Uh, Fearless act. I would consider that to be something that would be fearless. Not necessarily in the best way, though, because, it, like I said, has the potential to be incredibly harmful. And sometimes it did turn out to be harmful, but there were other times where, nothing really happened and it was all fine. But I would definitely consider myself in those moments to have been like a very stupid version of fearless, where, and by that I just sort of mean like devoid of fear. Like it doesn't really, I'm not listening to my instincts, which isn't necessarily good. I'm not, it's a stupid form of fear. It's a very stupid form of fearlessness, where, and a very reckless form of fearlessness, where you just sort of have no disregard, or, for anything or anyone. And it's just very much like, this is, I guess, what I'm doing. Because this is just the path that I'm going to go down for whatever the reason is. Obviously not great reasons, not good reasons. Um, you know, not 100% good reasons all the time. I definitely have gotten myself into situations where I've sort of had to be fearless in a negative way. It's kind of like the best of the bad ideas, or like, take the best of the bad options, like choose from one of those and then go down that road. Like I've definitely been in those situations, and it it is a form of fearlessness. But what I noticed while I was like going back and like thinking about, even now, like as I'm thinking about this, I'm realizing that most of the times in my life where I would have been considered fearless, um, they were in like a very stupid way. And they were not necessarily in, I wouldn't say like in bad faith. They were more just in sort of the vein of feeling like I didn't have any other choice. And also to a certain extent, like this go with the flow attitude, which I don't necessarily think is always the best, because of like, the situations that I've gotten myself into. Um, and I mean, looking back, it's one of those things where it's like, I mean, I'm still alive. Like, I'm definitely alive. Like, I'm still turning carbon dioxide into oxygen. So that's good, I suppose. It just, those kinds of moments in my life where, people would be like, oh my God, that was so brave, or that was so fearless of you. They didn't feel like that. They felt like, and I guess that's sort of, I wonder if that's kind of the point, is that like in those situations, they don't necessarily feel fearless or brave or even stupid. Like you don't feel like you're doing a dumb thing. You're just sort of like, these are the options that I have. And so I'm just going to do whatever I think is going to be the best at this specific moment in time. Um sorry. Allergy season, you guys. I'm really sorry if I just keep like sniffing and like coughing and stuff. Oh, side quest. So sorry. It's that time of year. But anyway, yeah, I guess I consider myself to be more stupid than fearless. Like, just looking back on certain decisions that choices that I made, um, like they're crazy. Like, I can look back at them now and go, what in the world was happening? Um, I don't really have like the best memory. So I'm kind of an unreliable narrator of my own life to a certain extent because I don't always have the best memory of like things that happened. I more remember like events that occurred and it's usually like the crazy shit like that, like driving across country to get a tattoo kind of a thing. Um like I remember that, but I could tell you which tattoo it was and like where I got it kind of a thing, but I can't really tell you any more detail other than like I just remember doing that. Um and so but I can tell you like the feeling. I can tell you like I do remember like my body remembers like the feelings. Um like so if I remember something like I can tell you like, "Oh yeah, I remember that. It was like super fun." Or, "Oh yeah, I remember that. That was not great." Like I can do that. Um and I don't really know what that's about. And I discovered that kind of I didn't really discover it. I more sort of like realized and like began to form like some acceptance around that while I was sort of exploring this like whole fearlessness concept, which actually brought out some fear um in me because I realized I couldn't remember and you know and that's a scary place to be. That's not a very fearless place to be. um I mean, it's possible that I'm just like getting old and like I have, you know, my memory is just like completely shot. But whatever. I don't really know why I brought that up. Um Other than I just sort of realized and like began to accept it while I was sort of exploring this topic because I really couldn't find places in my life where I felt that's really what it was. Is that I couldn't really find places in my life where I felt like fearless. Um and just by like that I mean like devoid of fear where I can't ever really remember a time in my life where I was just like I'm gonna just do it, like we're just gonna like in a positive way, like in a brave way. um and I just couldn't really find like a time in my life where that was the case, which kind of made me a little bit sad. It really kind of did because I realized that not only had I not really done a lot of like things that I would consider to be like brave or fearless um in a positive way, I realized that I did a lot more things that I would consider like stupid fearless and reckless fearless. And that didn't really make me feel very like proud of, all of my life choices. I mean, I'm not necessarily like I don't think anybody is proud of all their life choices. um but it just made me kind of realize, that I don't have a lot in my life that I'm super proud of. Where that I can say like, yes, I was fearless in this moment and like it all worked out and I I did a good thing or like a good thing happened um because of something that I did. Like I just can't really. It made me sad for a number of reasons because not only could I not really point to um any of those moments in my life, uh really it but I also couldn't remember, and I realized like the extent to which I there are big chunks of my life that I just can't remember, um which again made me very afraid. um it didn't make me fear less. It made me more afraid of like myself. um yeah, I don't we're going to have to explore that a lot. We're going to have to definitely do like a whole episode on fear. Um, just because of like the various and sundry things that, you know, were coming up during this episode of about fearlessness, which I don't know. Like I said, it was just very difficult for me to detach from being like fearless in a brave way, fearless in a positive way, and fearless in like a stupid way. And I think that just has a lot more to the fact that like maybe I'm just like super negative brained and I just like can't focus on, I just like can't, I refuse to like find the good in my life and like in myself. Um, because maybe at my core, I don't believe that I'm good. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We're going to figure it out. We'll go on that journey together, you guys. We will. We'll go on that journey together. I just, fearlessness just seems like a very foreign concept for me. It's just not, it's just not something that like I consider myself to be. And so I think because I don't consider myself to be it, to be fearless, it's very difficult for me. It's not, I'll tell you what, it's not. It's not difficult for me to find fearlessness in other people. Um, it's one of those things where it's like, it's very, very easy for me to find it in other people and to point it out in other people. And to like bring it out in other people. And by that, I mean like bring it to light and be like, no, you were really brave and really fearless in this moment. And I really admire you for that. It's, it's very easy for me to do that with others. It's not easy for me to do that with myself, like at all. That's probably one of the most difficult things or one of the things that I struggle with a lot, is like finding those like moments for myself. Um, I have gotten recently, I have gotten a lot of like, oh, you're so brave. And I don't, and what I noticed when I was called that, um, because like I said, it's very difficult for me to detach bravery from fearlessness. Um, I think that I don't know, we're going to have to figure that part out. We'll figure that part out before we go. But anyway, God, I keep saying that so many times. I don't even like that word. I'm so sorry, you guys. My thoughts are just kind of all over the place with this one because it's so difficult. It's such a hard concept for me. And I think it's just because I struggle with it a lot. Like I just, like myself, I just struggle with it within myself a lot. What I did notice though, kind of going back, is that when someone calls you brave or when someone calls you fearless, it doesn't feel like that. Like, it doesn't feel any of those things. It's not, it's very fear-based. And I think that that's part of being fearless, is knowing that you have that fear. And like part of being like fearless in a brave way, at least for me, I think there is an element to it that where you recognize and you can identify that you are afraid, and then make a decision that is not a fear-based decision. In a moment of crisis. Well, I don't know necessarily if it has to be in a moment of crisis. I don't necessarily think that it has to be in a moment of crisis. But yeah, I do think that there is an element of identifying and being able to recognize that you are afraid, and then sort of acting anyway. I do want there to be a caveat on that acting anyway, though, because like I said, you can act in a stupid, fearless way, meaning you can be reckless about it, and not really put a lot of thought into the decision. Or I think in order for you to be fearless, you have to have had to put thought into the decision, like not decisive, but you had to have put meaningful thought into the decision that is being made. I do not think, though, that it can be done without the recognition that there is fear there, and then doing that meaningful thought and acting on it in a way that is positive. I think that, and that's difficult to do because it's not always easy to know what to do. Just ever. Like, just ever. In any situation. Just ever. It's like, it's, at least for me, it's very difficult to know what to do, like, in a lot of situations. But you guys, I mean, you know, I consider myself to be, like, at least partially a robot, because I don't know how to interact with people, with like other human beings. I just like freeze, and I like clam up, and it's very difficult for me to be with other human beings, especially if I like don't know you. And that's because I'm just a fearful person. And so I think, you know, being fearless, it just doesn't seem to me that being fearless is one thing. And it's not necessarily about, because like I said, you can be fearless in a negative way, which is what we would call stupidity or idiocracy. You can also be fearless in a positive way, which is what we would consider to be brave. I do think the root of it, though, is that recognition of the fear, that fear is still present. And then figuring out what needs to happen regardless of the fear. And I don't hate fear, because I don't, it's difficult for me to hate, but I don't dislike fear. I think fear gets a bad rap, because fear is what keeps you alive. Fear is what, helps keep you from, dying. And since the game of life, is all about how long you can stay alive, I think that it's sort of like inherently written in our biological code to be afraid. But where that fear becomes a problem is when you let it like rule or dictate your life. Whereas like, I guess to a certain extent, like, do acts of fearlessness have to be big and like bold and like these, this giant like statement? Does it? In order to be fearless in a positive way, does it have to be this big, bold, like huge statement to the world kind of a thing where like, you get a book written about it or something, I don't think so. I think that there can be like sort of small acts of fearlessness. Um, what would that be? Well, taking medication, I think, can be considered a small act of fearlessness. Um, Especially if, you've, especially if you've had like a rough go of it with like something like medication, or, you have a lot of negative thoughts around medication, or you've just had a negative experience with medication in general. And I'm not specifically talking about like mental health medication or anything like that. I'm just talking about taking medication. Like if you had, like an adverse reaction, if you had an adverse reaction, or like a, one of the side effects to a medication, I would consider, like, I would be afraid to take medication again, especially for whatever ailment, that medication that I took that caused me pain and like harm. Um, you know, I would be apprehensive. Definitely. I do think that like I would consider that to be an act of fearlessness though, where, you had something negative happen and you kept going and you were able to, because I would imagine that that fear would still be there. Like, oh my gosh, I took this medication, and last time I took a medication for whatever ailment that I took it for, um, I had a really bad reaction. There would be fear there. There would be fear there. The fearless part of that would be to, I guess, to like get back in the ring, if that makes sense, like to keep going and to get, to continue to try, like a different medication or a new medication, or, a different coping mechanism, or, anything like that. Like, I don't necessarily think that, it has to be this like big dramatic like act. It can be something as fearless as like, yeah, like taking medication again, or trying a new medication, or something like that. So I do think that there can be like small acts. You can have like small acts of fearlessness like that. Although I don't even know if I would like to see. I don't even know if I like that wording, that like you know, um, yeah, that wording of like a small act of fearlessness. Oh, hold on just a second, guys. Yeah, I don't think I like that wording, a small act. Just because I don't really like the idea of putting a size on something like that, like fearlessness, because I mean, it's bound to happen, obviously. Like, it's definitely bound to happen for, you know, fear, bleh, for um, a size to be applied to fearlessness, because I think it's just inherent in human nature to want um it's a way that we describe things. It's it's not a very good way to describe things, I would say. Um at least not in all cases, because it can get like really convoluted, and things can start to get really confusing um when you start to apply, like when you start to measure something in that way, because you'll always inherently get that um well, what's the least amount, what's the most amount, because then you have to assign like numbers and stuff. Anyway, I don't side quest, you guys. Whew. Sorry. I just I just don't know how I feel really about doing that with something like fearlessness, because I feel like it cheapens it a little bit. Um and I don't want to like cheap out on fearlessness. Um because it is important to talk about like what we think of these things, you know. Um Speaking of that, like from a societal standpoint, I think that um we assign fearlessness to things that we admire in society, at least in like American society. I think that we do that. Um, and it's not necessarily things that we like desire. It's not just like exclusive to that, but it's like we value it in such a way that it's almost really overdone. And I don't know really what that's about. I think that like especially when we start talking about fearlessness as an aspect of something that we desire, like my very first thought is like Hollywood. Um because like in our movies, we admire and we desire. Um we admire like the people that we assign this fearlessness like aspect to. And we desire, the desire in that we have is to be like them. That desire to want to be the same as or similar to. Um, I think that that's just like an inherent, it's a part of belonging and a part of being. Um, that we as human beings we have that need, and it's a way that we fill that need, I think. Um, Obviously there's no way that that's exclusive to like just like solely American culture, but I do see it really dominantly in American culture. But I don't know if it's uniquely American. I don't think that desire or that like admiration of fearlessness is exclusive or unique to America. Because I'm sure it's got to happen like in other places of the world. It's bound to. It's it can be a thing of good. You know, I don't. So I just don't like it. Just I don't know. It just all feels like it's coming to a head with fearlessness. Because I do like I would it would be a lie for me to say that I don't desire those, like, to be fearless in a positive way. It would also be a lie for me to say that like I don't desire fearlessness in like a big dramatic way. um like, you know, in that like very Hollywood drama, like, you know, sacrifice and like all that in a bag of chips kind of a way. It would be a lie for me to say that I didn't desire that. What does it say about me? That's that I'm incredibly selfish and I'm very bougie and I want to be like the center of attention. um, which is weird for me. That is a very weird thing for me because when it like really comes down to it in reality, I don't want that. Like I really don't want that. I know that I wouldn't even be like I wouldn't be able to handle it. Like it's not a thing. I would not handle it fearlessly. I'll put it that way. Not even a little bit. Just because I am such a fearful person by nature and yeah, it would just not go well. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that fearlessness is like really complicated and I'm still having trouble sort of dissociating it from like bravery and stupidity. It it makes me curious. It makes me want to know like what you guys think. It makes me want to know um what other people think. You know, what it is. It makes me very curious. Um and want to understand because I don't know. Um and I'm just sort of beginning to figure out what I know about fearlessness for me. Um, and I think even to a certain extent, like that could be considered fearless. I don't know if I would consider it fearless. I am biased, so keep that in mind. But I just don't know. I just don't know if what it is. Yeah, that's just the plain and simple of it is I just don't know what it is. But I want to know. I want to find out. Um I'm curious, like I said. I I think it would be interesting. I think it's cool. I think I think it would be fun to figure out what other people think fearlessness is cuz I think it is like I think that being fearless or doing something that could be considered fearless is innately human. Um, like we can all feel it. Every human being alive can feel that. And what that is like, has the ability to do that and process that information. What I think is where it becomes like really complex is when you start like plucking individuals out because now you have to talk exclusively in terms of fearlessness for this individual relative to the experiences that they have, and have had in their life. And so I think that is what is unique, is when you start pulling individuals out, then that's when it becomes unique, and fearlessness can be different and present itself in different ways, relative, obviously, to the individual's experiences that they have had and will have in their life. And so I don't know why I'm sort of like justifying my thought process, or sort of explaining all of that. Because it almost feels like I'm justifying like the way that I'm thinking, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I think that I, to a certain extent, should have to do that, that it is a necessary part of, this relationship that I have with you and with me, kind of a thing. But I just am not sure why I like inherently feel the need, because like I do this a lot. Like this is just kind of like how I think. You guys are getting like a look behind the curtain on like how I think, and I don't know why I do that. That's interesting. God, this episode is so full of side quests. So many side quests. That's good though, I think, because it all ties in. It's all a part of fearlessness. It could be considered a form of fearlessness, I suppose. I don't, again, know if I would consider it that, but that is not for me to just like, okay, there's something. There we go. Is it something that is it something that I get to decide? Or is it something that, like, other people, the others, so anyone not you, has to decide? Like, who gets to decide what is fearless and what isn't? And who gets to decide when that fearlessness is reckless or when that fearlessness is, bravery? Like, who gets to decide that? Do I get to decide that? Or do you get to decide that? I don't know. There's a part of me that wants to say, well, I think everybody gets to decide that. And I think that to a certain extent is true, that everybody gets to decide what fearlessness not only is to them, but when an act is fearless. That's the tricky part, though, because, like, if I get to, like, for example, if I get to decide when something is fearless, because see, then it goes down that rabbit hole of, so if I get to decide when something is fearless, do I then get to decide when something is fearless in my life or in other people's lives too? Do I get to make that judgment? If the individual is the one that gets to decide this. If it's not the individual, what if it's the others? What if it's everybody else? What if it's you? What if that is who gets to decide what is fearless? And I assume it would be the majority of. Interesting. I don't know. I don't know. But if everybody gets to decide, then I think that I should only get to decide what is fearless in my life, not what is fearless in others. Because I only have the experiences that I have relative, and they're all relative to me, which means my only variable is me. I'm an expert on me, or that's the goal anyway, is to become an expert on me, not an expert on other people. Well, that gets sticky too, because then what if it's your job? So like, what if you're like a therapist, you know? What if it's your job to figure out, when something was fearless? Yeah, what if you're like a doctor, you know? Because then other people get to decide. It's both. It's obviously both. It's obviously we as individuals, but also we as a collective, the majority of that collective, I think. But I don't know. Like I said, it gets very convoluted and very sticky very quickly. And I don't know if any of that just made sense at all. But I guess we'll find out. I don't know. I just think it's a lot of things. Fearless. One of those being fear. But I would love to hear all your stories and like what you guys think. Yeah. Email me, man@pixieweirdo@protonmail.com. You can find us on Patreon. We are now on a Patreon. The Manic Pixie Weirdo podcast. That's what it's under. You should just be able to like search me and find it. Yeah, but if you can't donate like monetarily or anything like that, because we also have a Cash App and a Buy Me a Coffee. Excuse me. But anyway, if you can't donate like that, totally fine. I get it. It costs like $100 to fill up a truck the other day. It's totally fine. Money's tight for everybody right now. Jesus. The world is crazy. Talk about fearless. Just being alive. Goodness. Anyway. Yeah, you can reach out on the Twitters at @MPWeirdo Podcast or the Instagram and TikTok, _main_weirdo 1. You can check us out on all those places. Feel free to, like I said, email me, man@pixieweirdo@protonmail.com. I'd be really interested and really excited to like hear what you guys have to think about fearlessness. Thank you so much again to Mulu for the intro. I really love it. I hope you guys do too. But yeah, as always, guys, be kind and stay weird. Have a good one.